Resentment is like the one silent force that ruins marriages, and couples don't even realize that it's happening. And the reason I say that is because unresolved resentment, it really is the poison of marriage. It's very sneaky. It will take you to the point of no return faster than you think it can. So in this video, what we're going to do is I'm going to cover what resentment really is. I'm going to define it, and then we're going to look at its symptoms and how it ruins relationships. And then most importantly, we're going to talk about how to clear it out so that the old resentments are truly gone for good and they don't keep coming back in, and also how to prevent new resentments from building up in the future. So what is resentment? Resentment is really a lasting sense of indignation or ill will. So it's the lack of goodwill, essentially. And a lot of relationship experts, including John Gottman, they talk about the effect that it has on our perceptual filter of our relationship and our spouse. John Gottman in particular, he talks about negative sentiment override. And what this does is past hurts are going to cloud your perception of the present perception or the present moment. So basically it creates a lens through which everything that your partner is doing is going to be viewed negatively and vice versa. And it's going to distort the reality of the present. It'll make you miss out on what could be happening that could be positive in the moment because the past is right in front of you and everything is getting filtered through that lens. It is considered a category of anger, but unlike anger, which is typically very short-lived, resentment simmers below the surface. Sometimes you don't really notice. It doesn't necessarily hit you over the head. It feels like something that you can live with because it's in the background. But that's why it's so sneaky, is eventually it'll reach critical mass, and then one or both of you will decide you just can't do it anymore. Now, how does it show up in the relationship? These are the symptoms. The first thing is that resentment will block intimacy. It will bury the love, right? Your love is underneath the resentment and you can't really access it. So there's these layers of negativity, and that's going to prevent genuine emotional connection or physical intimacy as well, because the sense of safety isn't there because there's this resentment underneath the surface. There was a study done in 2019 that was published in the Journal of Marriage and Family, and this study found that there was a huge correlation between unresolved resentments in a marriage and the levels of intimacy. So the marriages that had the most unresolved stuff had the lowest levels of intimacy. Emotional withdrawal is also something you'll notice. You or your partner will be emotionally unavailable or sort of checked out, or maybe answering with just one-word answers. Maybe you're going to be avoiding eye contact. There's warmth missing. It might not be something overt, but there's something missing. There's not as much presence, and they're just not as available for the positive interactions or the banter that you used to have. You're also going to notice generalized statements, and this is part of the perceptual filter, right? So you'll hear phrases like you always or you never, and that shifts the focus away from very specific incidents into global criticism. So now we're talking about their character. Now we're talking about how they always are, as opposed to this was something that hurt my feelings, or this is something that I have concerns about. Also, a big one is passive-aggressive behavior like sarcastic comments, withholding affection, or small digs become really frequent. Little comments where it's like a joke, but it's kind of at their expense or at your expense if it's coming from them. Hopelessness and conflict is a really big one too. So this is where resentment shows up as when you have even the smallest point of tension, you immediately go to a place of it's not even worth discussing because we're not going to figure it out and it's going to be the same old thing. And I already know how this is going to go. I already know how they are. And because I'm hurt and because I'm hanging on to something from the past, I'm not even going to give them the opportunity now, or vice versa. So you just are operating from an assumption, a negative assumption that there is no point. And this is really interesting to me too. Resentment will erode trust because resentment will present itself as fake acceptance. So how you can tell that you're not in fake acceptance is when you can accept something, but you're not hanging on to resentment. But most people pretend like everything is fine, or they want everything to be fine. They want to be over it, but they're not really. And that creates incongruence, right? Like you can feel it if they're acting like it's fine, but you can tell it's not, or they're saying it's fine, but you feel that that's not the case, then you're not going to trust them. You're not taking them at their word. And you're in a state maybe of anxiety or hypervigilance because you just don't feel safe that what they said is actually really true. And I think that it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. When that's happening, when all of these things are happening, you're holding on to past grievances and you're not able to to see the positive changes that they might be trying to make, or maybe you're trying to make some changes. The challenge with this is that it can cause like just giving up. Like, well, what's the point of trying if I'm really working on it? Nothing I do is going to be enough. So if you're in resentment and your spouse is trying to make changes and you're not letting go and you haven't had repair, and they're trying and they're trying and they're trying and it's not moving the needle, eventually they're just going to give up. You're going to be left being unhealed, right? So that's what I mean when I say that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. What it is that has you bothered and that disconnect, eventually their efforts at trying to fix it and make it right and reconnect, they're just going to give up. And then you can point the finger and say, see, you don't care, or see, nothing is ever going to change. So that is why resentment is so sneaky and so dangerous. Now we're going to get into how you can clear resentment and also how you can prevent resentment. So there are 5 things that you can do to clear resentment. To clear resentment, the first thing you have to do is you have to acknowledge the resentment. If you're resentful, you want to reflect on like, what am I holding on to? How is this impacting the relationship? What is it that's bothering me? What is it that I need to clear it? Then you need to share your feelings without blame, framing it as your experience. Like, I feel hurt by XYZ when this happened, or as opposed to like an accusation, you did this, you didn't care, you meant this. Like, don't speak for their intentions. Don't speak for what they were thinking or feeling. Just share, kind of like pull back the curtain and say, when this happened, this is the meaning that it had for me. I'm concerned. I'm left feeling these ways. So you really have to be honest that you're resentful, but you're expressing it in a way where you're letting them know that your intention in bringing up your resentment is that you want to clear it. You're bringing it up because you recognize that it's blocking your connection, and you're raising it so that you can together clear it out so that you can reconnect, that there's a really positive intention behind it. The second thing you have to do is you have to expand the positive in the relationship. Now, in the program that I work with clients in, even before diving into tough conversations, before we get into the hot button issues, the long-standing things that have accumulated over time, you can actually table those temporarily, strategically, not to put it under the rug permanently, right? Not because I do believe in rocking the boat. A lot of times we have to sort of find some goodwill between us before we can have a successful conversation to clear out the resentments. So before diving into those tough conversations, you want to create a pattern interrupt by focusing on the really good things in your relationship. You want to look for opportunities to create a positive interaction. You can do this for a few weeks. So let's say you have longstanding resentments and you're really not sure how to bring it up and you're working on how you're going to communicate it. First, just build some positive interactions, appreciate your partner, share some gratitude, enjoy what you can enjoy, knowing I will get to that. When you know that it's not a long-term thing and you know you're going to get to it, it's a lot easier to do that. That's going to build a sense of emotional safety so that when you do have the repair conversations, you have the emotional resources to do it. There's more love between you. There's more positive assumptions. Like I was talking about before, your filter will change a little bit and it'll go much better. Once you've built the positive interactions, then the step 3 is you're going to engage in repair conversations. So once you're more emotionally connected, and maybe you're not totally emotionally connected, but it feels like it's as good as it's going to get, that's when you're going to want to address specific resentments through repair conversations. So this is why I said earlier, you have to know, like, what is it that I need to feel better? What is going to clear this for me? So identify, what do you need to move forward? Do you need acknowledgement? Do you need an apology? Do you need a new agreement, a commitment to do something differently going forward? Do you need just a hug? Like, it could be something so simple. Could it be validation, empathy, whatever you need, you get to decide. That's what's so nice about this is, like, if you're in resentment, it's really up to you to decide what it is that you need to clear the resentment. Then they can decide if they can give it to you or not, right? But you can always ask for those things. Communicate that very, very clearly. The biggest pitfall that we fall into is that spouses do really want to heal it. And they're like, well, I've already apologized. I don't know what else I can do. Well, maybe the apology was something that would have worked for you to clear resentment, but your partner wants something else. You can ask them too. If you've tried really hard to clear resentment and it isn't moving the needle, you can always ask them, what do they need? But generally speaking, I mean, my advice always is, if you're the one with the resentment, you're the one that has to know what you need. And it's your job to communicate it, because otherwise you're choosing to hang on to that resentment. You're choosing to stay disconnected if you don't come forward and say, I've got resentment, here's what would help. Then if you're the one clearing the resentment, you want to really own your role. Right? You want to take ownership of your part, even if you think it's a very small percentage, even if you think that the way that they're interpreting it, maybe you think, oh, they're overly sensitive. I can't believe they're holding on to resentment about that. That happened 5 years ago. Don't move into judgment. Just understand that based on their history, their meaning making, their perceptual filter, their limiting beliefs at the subconscious level, they're going to have different meanings. So don't judge it. Just find out, like, okay, what is it and what can I own, even if it is a small percentage? And then finally, you want to create a new narrative. So once repair begins, you have to let go of the old story that you've held about your partner and the relationship. You have to shift your focus to their efforts and the positive changes that are happening right now. My clients will tell you, what are we noticing? What is the evidence that things are changing? Because resentment can only dissipate if you actively choose to move forward. Now, there is a caveat to that, which is that you cannot create a new narrative and truly turn the page on something if the things that cause the resentment are still happening. The things that were causing the resentment have to be over in order to be able to turn the page. And if there's new things happening and there's improvement and you really see a change, then that's the part where you, the person that has the resentment, would just have to choose to let it go. I had to do this in my marriage. Every time I would think about something and disagreements that we had about like equity, distribution of labor, and co-parenting our young children, my husband had apologized. He had acknowledged it. He had recognized it. And I would still get mad every time I thought about it. And one day I just had to be like, it's over now. Like, it's not happening anymore. There's literally nothing more that he can say or do. So now I just have to receive that and choose to release that so that it no longer informs my perception of him. If you're the person that is trying to melt the walls of resentment in your spouse, you have to be patient. You have to realize that this takes time. If you're trying to get them to just let something go that's still happening, that's on you, and that's not going to work. So that's my caveat on that. Now, let's say that you have cleared your resentments, you've addressed something that happened in the past, something that you've been able to let go completely. How do you prevent it going forward? How do you create a relationship where resentments are not accumulating or building again? I really look at it as like fresh air. You have to open the window sometimes and let the fresh air in and air it out. Fresh start, right? You have to commit. Like, a healthy relationship is a relationship in which both parties expect to have those conversations every now and then. Hey, there's been some things that have been building up. We should probably talk. Maybe you can feel that something's building up in them. Hey, should we talk? Let's clear it out. Don't sit on it, right? So the first thing you want to do is you want to build a culture of appreciation. That is because it becomes the safe container in which to have these conversations when they do crop up. So what does that look like? You're going to want to express gratitude for your partner's efforts. Look for those things that you can appreciate, big or small. Sometimes we really overlook the small things that we have taken for granted over time. If you really look for those things, you will find them. You want to focus on their strengths and their contributions rather than fixating on their shortcomings. That's easier said than done, but it really is a game changer. And this, of course, is the gratitude thing that I mentioned earlier. Shift your mindset by focusing on what they do well and expressing that. But the most important thing is noticing it, because it's really an inside job. When you really start to change the way you're looking at them, they will feel it even if you don't say anything. As I said that, I'm like, I don't want that to make people think that they shouldn't express it, because it is a gift to express it, and it really will solidify it and will anchor in trust in the relationship. The other thing you have to do is set realistic expectations, because a lot of times resentment comes from unmet expectations. So if it's always an unmet expectation and it's a thing that maybe you don't agree on, you do have to look, and you might look at it and decide, no, these are realistic expectations, but you have to evaluate that. Don't take it at face value. A lot of times we have unmet needs from childhood that we're unconsciously trying to get our spouse to meet. And so we're just mad at them and resentful to them for not caretaking us in a way that we should have been caretaken when we were little. It might not be an expectation that is reasonable in a healthy, mature relationship that's not codependent. So make sure you check in with yourself about that. Are your expectations fair, or are they rooted in your own insecurities? Do you have your own work to do that really there's nothing more they can do? This is like something you have to work on. Also, if you do have a grievance, you have to speak up early. So that's what I mean about opening the windows. Like, don't let the air get too bad between the two of you. The relationship is a biosphere. There is air between you. There's an environment, an ecosystem that you live in. And resentment corrodes that air that you breathe. And then finally, you need to practice true acceptance. So what acceptance means is not necessarily that it's okay. You might be dealing with deal breakers. But if you're dealing with deal breakers, then you have to accept that you're dealing with deal breakers, and you have to accept that it's below the line, and then you have a hard decision to make. So when I say acceptance, it's not always accepting whatever they throw at you and you stay in the relationship with acceptance. It just means you accept reality. You accept what is real. You accept certain behaviors or limitations that your spouse might have, or decide if you can or if you can't. Ask yourself, can I accept that? Does the good outweigh the bad when I do a cost-benefit analysis? And if the good in the relationship strongly outweighs the bad, maybe you can accept it and you can let certain things go, because it's like, that's just how they are. They're always late. They always forget this thing or whatever. If you can let it go, then you really have to let it go without any grudges and remind yourself, I made that choice. You cannot stay in resentment after you've already chosen to accept something. That's not fair. You're not owning your choices when you do that. You're staying in blame and you're making them accountable for a choice that you made. I don't think resentment has to destroy your relationship at all. On the contrary, I think most relationships end because there is a lack of repair, because there's been resentments that have never been addressed, which to me is a tragedy because they can be. So you just have to think of it as something that needs to be cleared out. Make it your mission to make sure that nothing is festering. Own what you are resentful for. They can't read your mind. Own what you need for repair. Again, they might be giving you something, trying to repair, and it's not moving the needle for you. You have to tell them what you need. Also, if you're the spouse where you know that your spouse is in resentment and you want to repair it, don't ignore if they've expressed resentment. If they're telling you that they feel resentful and it's still not resolved, a lot of times spouses will just wait for it to be over. As long as they're not bringing it up and they're not complaining, I'm going to assume that everything is fine. Do not make that mistake. Unless you have heard that the resentments have been repaired and they feel relief and you're reconnected, you can assume they haven't been repaired. So express your intention to help them clear out old hurts. Just say, hey, look, I can tell that you're still in resentment. Maybe there's still some things that I need to help you clear out. I'm your ally. I want to bring back the emotional connection. And if there's something that I did, let's talk about it. We'll clear it out together, right? That's a gift for your spouse. If you want to learn more about this topic of resentment, I do have 2 other videos on YouTube that you can go to check out. There's one called 3 Myths of Resentment, and also there's another one called How to Get Past Resentment for Good, which goes into way more depth on what I just talked about if you want to do a deeper dive.